So, Madam Vice President, unfortunately, our distinguished friend took most of my lines away. I hope to be able to say some of the things that she said about you, but your long career as a lawyer in the politics of the Philippines and your time in office as the 14th Vice President, well known to all of us and much admired. And it's with a particular pleasure that I find myself today with you and a chance to be part of a conversation about you, your life, your views on the modern Philippines. And so, with your permission, I thought we might as well get started. And I would like to start it with the opening question, if that's convenient.
Yes, of course.
So, 2022 has been a very busy year for you. You were Vice President, you were candidate for the presidency, and you've switched gears now and you've taken on many roles, including a very important one in combating poverty alleviation, and work in housing in many fields where you've developed expertise over the years. So look back on 2022, look ahead in your life, where you're going and what you see are the challenges ahead for you. And with that, a warm welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Frank. Thank you, Asia Society, for having me again. Very soon after my Zurich event. 2022 was really a year of many unexpected things, Ambassador. First of all, I never expected to run for president, even if I was vice president already, and it was the most natural thing to expect me to run. The 6 years that I was vice president was very tumultuous. Disinformation was in full gear, and I was at the receiving end of so much of it. And going into the filing for the candidacies for president, I was, in the surveys, I was, I think, number 6 or number 7 out of possible contenders. I had an approval rating of, if I am not mistaken, 7% before the filing of certificates of candidacy. So it seemed like I never had a chance at it. In fact, going into 2022, the one thing that I was doing was really trying to come up with a unity ticket among all the non-administration candidates. I felt like it was the most important thing to be able to accomplish coming into the elections, that a unity ticket would contest the administration bets, but I was unsuccessful. And because I was unsuccessful in putting up a unity team, the pressure mounted that I run for president. And the decision to run for president was made at the very last minute. But even after I filed my candidacy already, I felt like there was no chance for me at all, given the circumstances. But then during the campaign, a lot of unexpected things happened. We were talking about it, Ambassador Frank, earlier, that what happened during the campaign was nothing short of, amazing and magnificent as far as all the many other campaigns go. It was my 9th campaign. I had 6 campaigns for my husband before. It was my 3rd. It was the first loss for us, but it was the most fun of all. It was the most fun of all in the sense that many of the Filipinos who are here who have been witness to the campaign, I felt like it was unprecedented that people went out of their way to really work on the campaign. It was the first campaign I was in where all the energies were not centered on the central campaign headquarters. Everyone was doing their own thing. It was never a challenge for us to mount big rallies because people would just come. Our rallies were nearing the millions already, and in the Philippines, it was so. You were there. You know how campaigns go, and it was not traditional at all. It was not traditional in the sense that the energies was not centered on me. But everyone was doing their thing. So it was the best campaign of all. So even if I lost the elections, I felt like I still had the responsibility to make sure that we build on what we started during the campaign. A lot of people, a lot of our supporters were grieving after, during the election night. So I felt like it was my responsibility to shift, to try to influence them, to shift gears. So I think 4 days or 5 days after the elections, we mounted a Thanksgiving rally. I don't know if anyone here was there, but we mounted a Thanksgiving rally, and I announced during the Thanksgiving rally that the elections was not the end of our fight. It was not the end of our fight. A lot of people are expecting us to build on what we started. So that was when I announced that we're starting Angat Pinas, which is the anti-poverty program that we're doing now. It's actually a continuation of what we were doing when I was at the office of the Vice President. But the different thing about the one we have now is that it's not government anymore. It's a non-government organization. And it's not just anti-poverty. But we're making sure that the models for the anti-poverty programs, we have spaces for volunteers to participate. So it's like continuing what happened during the campaign, that the energies are not just with me, but with all the volunteers who are contributing whatever they can to help.
Well, this is a challenge, serious challenge for you, but one of the reasons I'm excited this evening to have you with all of us at the Asia Society is that you're part of an extraordinary tradition. Women have been powerful players in the public policy space in the Philippines for decades. In fact, as I think about all of Asia more broadly, I think Philippines is led in having women performing the highest offices of the land. I was privileged to have been ambassador at the time of a woman as president, and a very powerful and effective woman who brought the country back from the Marcos years. So I wondered if I could get you to reflect for a moment, a message for all of us, women in politics, women in Philippine politics. What are the lessons you would have all of us understand and learn? What's your signal to the next generation?
What you said, Ambassador, is actually true, that the Philippines is leading as far as gender equality and gender responsiveness is concerned. In fact, I think in the Asia Pacific, we're number 2, next to New Zealand, as far as the gender responsiveness gap is concerned. But among us who are working still for more gender equality, we're not satisfied yet. We produced a lot of women leaders, President Cory Aquino, many other leaders, not just in the executive, but also in the legislative department, even in the Supreme Court. We've had a lot of women leaders, but as I've said, as far as we're concerned, we're not satisfied yet, in the sense that I feel like we still have a lot to do. In the last 6 years, when President Duterte was president, there were a few women who, aside from myself, who were in the forefront of the fight against, violation of human rights, the way that the drug war was being conducted. Senator Laila de Lima is one, Maria Ressa is one. So a lot of very, very, very courageous, very brave women willing to fight it out despite the difficulties. And I think the challenge now is to continue providing that space, to continue providing that space to harness many more of our women leaders. It's not just the big names in politics, but we have a lot of very promising local officials who have not gotten the recognition that they deserve yet. We feel like we should harness their capabilities, because we feel that they are the future In fact, after my husband died, we set up a foundation in his name, the Jesse M. Robredo Foundation, and we're focusing on really developing young local officials to be better leaders than we are in the future.
Well, how fortunate the Philippines is to have had the record you've had so far and to have that powerful push forward. Diversity in politics is a worldwide challenge, not met even in this country, but I can see in your determination and the ability of the Philippines to adapt and change, there's a terrific future for women. So I want to congratulate you on carrying that tradition forward. But you had, as you mentioned, not an easy time as Vice President. The Philippines, as everyone in the room knows, elects presidents and vice presidents on separate tickets. And so you weren't President Duterte's first choice as vice president, and you served ably despite that fact. Do you want to reflect for a moment on your experience, which was not always easy? I think particularly of your experience with him and the drug issue. So look back for a moment, and what were the highs and the lows of your vice presidency?
You know, it started, the indications that it wasn't going to be easy started really early. Right after we were proclaimed as the duly elected president and vice president, I started exerting effort in trying to seek an audience with the president, with the then president-elect already, because I felt like as vice president, the one thing that is expected of me is to be a support, to be a good enough support of the president. So I felt like I should try to see him and offer him my support. I was never given that privilege. I talked to so many people in his circle, and I wasn't given that privilege. And then I felt that the next one was, I'm going to see him during the inauguration. So during the inauguration, I planned on offering him my support. So when the inauguration was nearing already, we were told that the inauguration will be in Malacanang. Because traditionally, you know, with President Aquino then and Vice President Binay, they were in the same inauguration together. So I felt like it was a tradition that would be carried. So they said that the president preferred something simple, which was very much appreciated. So I think the first time that I was told you can bring 100 guests. So I said, okay, 100. I started listing already. And then the second day I was told, oh no, you can just bring 50. Okay, 50 guests. And then it became 30, it became 20, and then it became 10. So I said, okay, I won't be inviting anyone anymore, just my immediate family. So 10. And then the day after, I was told the president doesn't want you in the inauguration. No. So it was just a few days before the actual inauguration. So we had to rush. We had a very simple inauguration in our office. So I had a separate inauguration. So those were the first indications. I was lucky that I saw the president, I think, the first week of our office. We saw each other. We were seated beside each other in a military event. I think it was a turnover of the armed leadership of the armed forces of the Philippines. And then during that event, I told the president that, Mr. President, I've been asking for, an audience with you, but I was never granted an audience. So the president looks at his special assistant, and then he said, give her time in Malacanang. And then 2 days after, I was in Malacanang. And I felt at that time that the president felt my sincerity. He felt that I didn't mean any harm. So it was actually very, very cordial. And then after that meeting, I was offered to be the housing secretary. So when I was housing secretary, we had a very cordial relationship. I would attend the cabinet meetings, and sometimes I would be at the end of misogynistic remarks. It was kind of challenging how to react to them, because I can't be too onion-skinned or sensitive about it. At the same time, there are limits to what I can accept. But then the killing started. When the killing started, I became very, very vocal. I became very vocal of my opposition to the way the drug war was being conducted. And I knew at that time that it would just be a matter of time before I would be axed, or my attention would be called. But there was none of that. And in fact, I remember during one of the cabinet meetings, I told the president that how much I appreciate the fact that he didn't take it against me, that I was very vocal against it, because it was something that was very important to me. But then one Friday afternoon, I received a text message saying, you are now being barred from attending cabinet meetings. It was through a text message. So how can I function if I would not be able to attend cabinet meetings? And at that time, I was still trying to find budget for our programs. So I resigned from the cabinet. And after I resigned from the cabinet, I was the punching bag of a lot of people already. They felt like a lot of people did not take it too well, that I was the vice president and I wasn't supportive of the programs of the president. But what they didn't see was that in some of the programs that I agreed with, I was very vocal about my support. But then there were some things that I had to put my foot down, and the killings because of the drug war was one of them. So that was what I had to contend with the 6 years that I was vice president.
Madam Vice President, I think the entire audience tonight admires your candor, your willingness to describe this clearly very difficult period, and your determination to stand by the responsibilities of the office that you were elected to, which leads me to ask you to reflect a bit on your own future. Do you want to continue to contest for highest office?
I hate saying I'm not running anymore, because I said that so many times already and I ate my words. When my husband died, before my husband died, in fact, when he finished his term as mayor of our city, a lot of his supporters wanted me to take his place. And I said over my dead body, I'm not ever going to enter politics. But then the plane crash happened. And I was, after the plane crash happened, a lot of people were pushing me to run. And then I said, again, over my dead body. But during the last day of filing for certificates of candidacy, I filed as a candidate for the House of Representatives. And when I was a member of the House of Representatives, I wasn't the first choice to run for the vice presidency, but then the first choice decided to run for another position, and I was the only choice left. And even if I said I wouldn't run for the vice presidency so many times, I ran. And then when I was vice president, I said I wouldn't run for the presidency, and yet I did. So I wouldn't say I wouldn't anymore.
Good.
But if there is one lesson that I've learned from my years as a public servant, is that when there is a call for you to serve, no matter how difficult, you answer the call. Because not everyone is given the privilege of being in a position to make a difference. And that's what happened to me many times over, and despite the difficulties, I don't have any regrets.
Wonderful. Madam Vice President, can we open the aperture of our discussion a bit broader? This has been an amazing year for the Philippines. In fact, if I look at the statistics, the Philippines has enjoyed quite phenomenal relative to other countries' economic growth and performance. I think you're running 6.5%, where others are having a great deal of trouble. What are the challenges, as you see it ahead, to sustain that level of growth in the Philippine economy? What's going to be needed in order to keep the Philippines at high on the list of competitive economic societies in Asia?
We were doing so well until the pandemic. We were doing so well until the pandemic, and then when the pandemic struck, we had a lot of problems. Inflation rate is high. We're doing better now than we were 2 years ago, but it's still very challenging. So I think it's many different things, Ambassador. Number one, trust in government. Not just trust from the constituency, but trust from the investors. For the investors to put their stakes again. We're getting there, but we haven't reached our 2019 levels yet. So it's been a challenge because the Ukraine-Russia war happened right after the pandemic, just when we were trying to get back from everything that happened in the last 2 years. So there's still a lot that needs to be done as far as economics is concerned. There's a lot of effort being poured now into selling the Philippines again after all that has happened. We're optimistic. We're optimistic that we will be on our feet again after the 2 years that everything that we've worked for felt like it was all drawn away from us. But we're doing okay again. Again, not in the levels of 2019 yet, but we're getting there. There are a lot of things that need to be changed, because if there is anything that the pandemic showed us, we're basically a consumption economy. Our imports definitely have caused us a lot of problems because of the current global economic situation. There has to be poured in a lot of effort in making sure that we're not so import dependent anymore. There has to be a lot of effort in making sure that we're more self-sufficient as far as agriculture is concerned. There have been a lot of realizations, but again, we're optimistic in the sense that we have always been very resilient. From the years before the pandemic have showed us that we can do it. So there's no way why we can't bounce back.
Well, there are perhaps two issues that I'd like to pursue in this regard. The first is food insecurity. The world is facing a huge food deficit. Country after country competing for scarce food resources. And I've been struck by how food dependent the Philippines is on importation of foodstuffs. In a land in which agriculture is a dominant part of your national life, and you've always been so productive. So what needs to be done to make the Philippines once again a powerful food-producing nation, not only for your own breadbasket, but beyond that in the export markets?
A lot, Ambassador. If you look at our budget, not just now, but in the course of the many years that passed, not a lot of focus has been given to agriculture. We have been focusing too much on rice production, which we have not been very successful in, considering the many typhoons that come our way each and every time. We have not We have not given focus on products we might have competitive advantage in. There's a lot of things that have not been given enough attention, and it's like we only started realizing it at the time that so much food insecurity is going on around the globe. You know, the prices of onions in the Philippines now is too much. I don't know if the Filipinos here are aware how much white onions cost in the Philippines. But it's a wake-up call. It's a wake-up call in the sense that, as you have said, the Philippines is an agriculture country. And there's no reason why we should be dependent on food importation. We, under Angat Buhay, which was our program from the time I was Vice President, we have discovered a lot of missteps as far as agriculture is concerned. For example, Ambassador, we started helping small-scale farmers. And when we started helping small-scale farmers, you know, it's very often that small farmers in the Philippines are not landowners, but they're just farm laborers, meaning to say they don't own the land, but they just use the land of other people. But in a very small land holding, you will see one farmer, you know, waking up at dawn and working seven days a week, toiling, and then he would have all the products. We call it, I'm sure you have heard of it, bahay kubo and pinakbet and chop suey. So they would have, in a small land holding, they would have all the products that's needed in a pinakbet, or they would have all the products that's needed in a chop suey, or all the products that were mentioned in the bahay kubo song. And you know, it's difficult because they don't produce in scale. They don't produce in scale, so they can't compete, they can't sell to the institutional buyers. They're not being trained to do block farming. So you know, they would plant, and then they would plant just for themselves or for retail. But you know, when it's peak season, they lose everything that they did because prices would be down. And it took a lot of changing of mindsets of the farmers, but it was also very reflective of how government was handling agriculture, because it should have been the focus to make sure that whatever the farmers would produce would go to particular markets. And we did that in a small scale. What we did was we talked to the local chambers of commerce and industry. We talked to the restaurant owners. We would talk to hotel owners. We would talk to owners of hospitals and would ask them to buy from our farmers. And then we would pour resources to the farmers and tell them, produce this particular crops because you have markets waiting for you already. And you know, it was not too much of a challenge, in the sense that it was very doable. But after 1 year of doing that, the income of our farmers multiplied 100-fold already. So, meaning to say, if only government would put a lot of focus on making sure that the farmers, you know, I think the metrics is the one that's problematic, Ambassador, because you know, when you talk of metrics, you always measure productivity of farmers, and when you talk of productivity of farmers, sometimes you only help those who are there already, but you don't help the smaller ones because they don't produce enough. So I keep telling them that, you know, the metric should be what's the income of the farmers. So have the income of the farmers increased after you have helped them. And when we did that in our own program, the result was dramatic. So I feel like, Ambassador, if only government focuses on improving the lives of the farmers, farmers would be more productive in a good way.
Right.
It's not like, you know, when you just talk of productivity and not talk about income. Most of the time, you help farmers who are already established.
This is wise advice, good direction, but you face another major issue in the Philippines, and I wonder how you reflect on it, and that's the impact of climate change. I can't think of a nation that faces more consequential changes in its future than does the Philippines. How do you look at the question of climate resilience, what the Philippines has to do to prepare itself for what's going to be a challenging time in all our lives?
One of the things that we felt we were lacking in, Ambassador, was that when we talk of resiliency from all the calamities that come our way, a lot of effort is poured into relief operations and not preparation, which should not be the case at all. So not a lot of effort is being poured into, for example, in agriculture. There should be more focus in crops that would withstand climate change effects, but there's none of it. Infrastructure, for one. We were just starting a few years ago, for example, changing the designs of our school buildings into designs that would withstand very strong typhoons. So there's not a lot of effort in that until very recently. Until very recently, there was not a lot of thought into really pouring into making things more resilient. We feel like we have local councils against climate change, but there's not a lot of effort being poured into really preparing them to incorporate climate resiliency plans, climate resiliency measures in their plans. So one more thing as far as food security is the West Philippine Sea. The West Philippine Sea is a vast resource as far as food is concerned for the Philippines. So it's something we feel so strongly about. It's not just protecting our sovereignty, but also protecting our natural resources, and also making sure that we will not be less food secure because of that.
Well, we've talked a lot about the Philippines this evening, and before I open the floor to further questions from your audience, I wonder if I could get you to talk about the Philippines on the global stage. We're at a time of great power competition. China's on the rise. The United States is determined to protect its interests in the Asia-Pacific region. So I want to ask you to talk about two subjects. One is your relationship with the People's Republic of China, and second, your relationship with the United States. How does the Philippines see itself in this time of real serious global competition?
It has been, the signs were quite confusing, Ambassador. The signs were quite confusing in the recent past. There's been a lot of talk of abrogating our Visiting Forces Agreement, our Mutual Defense Treaty, and we are glad it did not happen. The United States is a very strong ally of the Philippines. In fact, the only treaty ally of the Philippines, and it would be to the benefit of the Philippines and the Filipino people if we continue strengthening those ties. I feel like in the current administration that is being done, and we hope it continues it continues that way. As far as China is concerned, it doesn't have to be the U.S. or China. Because China is our strongest trading partner, and it would also be to the benefit of the Filipino people and the Philippines as a country to have very strong economic ties with China. But we have to put our foot down as far as threats to our sovereignty is concerned. We feel like our relationship with China should be one based on mutual respect. It should be one based on, an acknowledgement of international law. And when I say an acknowledgement of international law, that includes the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. We were able to achieve a resounding victory when the arbitral tribunal decided in our favor in 2016, and we feel like, There is no other country which brought China to court, and despite knowing that, despite the acknowledgement that we should strengthen our economic relations with them, we have to put our foot down as far as the West Philippine Sea is concerned. Make sure that whatever relations we have, there's always an acknowledgement of not just international law, but more particularly the decision of the arbitral tribunal.
Well, you've also emphasized in your remarks the relationship the Philippines has with the United States and our treaty ties. It was a moment of great pride when Vice President Kamala Harris has visited the Philippines recently, has put the United States squarely on the side of the strengthening of your national defense. But as you look at the relationship going forward, what do you think are the major challenges that we as Americans ought to think about as we think about our ties to the Philippines?
Not just as far as the Philippines is concerned, Ambassador, but as far as many other countries are concerned. It's like when the conversation already includes the U.S. and China, it's like there is a need for one country to decide who to be closer with, the U.S. or China. But as I've said earlier, that should not be the case at all. As I've said, the U.S. has been a source of great help as far as many, not just military might, but many other things. The bulk of our Filipino workers abroad are in the United States. It's many different things, but the global stage has a lot of challenges challenges right now, and I feel like there's also a lot of opportunities, not just for the Philippines, for ASEAN, for example. ASEAN, I feel, has not maximized the role that it was set to play in the region, and it's an opportunity where the Philippines can play a more important role as far as the regional architecture is concerned. So it's many different things, but always the focus should be what will be good for the Filipino people.
Absolutely. That's a sovereign responsibility of any government. But I take a moment of pleasure to hear your insistence on the quality of the ties between Washington and Manila. It's very important. Our treaty responsibilities are considerable. There's another aspect of our relationship, though, that I'd like to ask you to address. In fact, it's a question that's come from the audience, and that's the future of democracy. We've been through a roiling election season in this country that I know you followed. You've just been through your elections, and yet we've discovered flaws in democratic practice that we need to address and be clear about. I've been struck by how much attention you've put on the question of trolling and troll armies and disinformation in politics and the undermining effect of disinformation on normal political discourse. So I thought you could take a moment for all of us and share some of your insights into how this pernicious set of habits in social media can be dealt with.
Ambassador, I was telling you earlier on the backstage that the reason why I'm invited to a lot of forums like this is because of disinformation. It's like a lot of focus now is how disinformation has affected not just our elections, but our democracy. And I think what's happening in the Philippines, it's not unique in the Philippines. It's also happening in the United States. The good thing about everything now is there has been a lot of, not a lot, but there has been studies conducted already. Because in the last 6 years, when disinformation was so bad in the Philippines, we didn't understand it. It was like we were groping in the dark. We didn't know how to respond. we were doing things. It was not a coordinated response because we didn't know what was the correct response. But now that there are actually 2 groundbreaking studies conducted already. The first one was unmasking disinformation operations in the Philippines. It was very bothersome. I don't know if any of you read that already, but it was very bothersome in the sense that when I first read it, it was so different from the kind of trolling that we imagined it to be. It turned out because of that study that disinformation. The disinformation architecture in the Philippines is an industry. It's an industry that's being participated in by legitimate creative industries. It's not like, when before, Ambassador, when you talk of trolls, you have a stereotype already in your mind that these are people who do not have work. These are people who sell their souls because they need money. But that particular study showed that it was not like that at all. Because it's an entire industry that's participated in by, professionals. So it's a different take of how selling and branding politicians are for election purposes. The second study came out just last month. And the second study now says that disinformation in the Philippines cannot be just described as disinformation. It's actually influence operations already. It has become it has become so much worse than before. It's so expansive already. It involves many different things already. It has reduced the influence of media. Media is not as influential in the Philippines anymore as before. And the bad thing about it is that for all its faults, at least with legitimate media, there's accountability. When you saw this information without accountability and under the cloak of anonymity, you say a lot of things. But because there are studies already, we are now trying to. I'm in the thick of. I was telling Ambassador a while ago that I just arrived 2 days ago from the Philippines. I was in Manila for 6 days, and I was there for a series of speaking engagements. But one of the things that I did when I was there was really trying to make sure that we coalesce with a lot of many different groups already, civil society, academe, the church, business, to make people realize that this information is not just the problem of politicians, but it's the problem of everyone. It's the whole society. So that's what that is what we are trying to face right now. Gathering everyone, making sure that everyone is on the same page as far as fighting disinformation is concerned. We're looking at many different best practices. For example, there's one that's being done in Europe where it's an initiative called Check My Ads. This initiative has been started by the creative industry and businesses, and they're saying that we won't put in ads in all the websites that's been instrumental in spewing disinformation. So we're looking at a lot of things. We're looking at the initiatives which were started in Brazil during the presidential elections in Brazil. We're looking at initiatives that were started in India as far as net neutrality is concerned. So there are many different initiatives that we're looking at. It's not that we will copy them, but at least they will serve as a guide on which would be effective and which would not be effective. But at least there are studies now that can guide us.
Well, and that you're so live to this subject, I found myself last night on the telephone with my daughter who works with a company with heavy interests in the Philippines. And this aspect of her company's work goes directly to the question of trolling, working with Philippine companies and Philippine individuals and tech-savvy practitioners in identifying ways in which you can out trolls and how you can defend against them and how you can protect American companies using the tech skills available in the Philippines. So we're in a partnership, and it's a global war, a global matter of global concern, particularly for the democracies. So I'm just delighted to hear from you. But the Philippines brings to the table other tech skills. You have been at the forefront of technology development over the past several decades, and I've watched it with some admiration. We now have a new and interesting challenge, and that is as supply chains switch, as the United States pulls back a bit from China, as other supply chains are affected. Philippines is in a very interesting position. And I wonder what you think is the best strategy going forward in the part of the Philippines to take advantage of this technological readjustment and put the skills of the Philippines to work?
It's been the subject of many conversations in the recent past. In fact, when I went home, that was also the subject of the discussion with a group of business people I was with. And we were talking exactly about how to make sure that we maximize whatever the opportunities are for the Filipinos. In the last few years, we have lost a lot to Vietnam, as far as hosting Vietnam and India, as far as hosting the BPO industries are concerned. And that is because of many other things, including government policy. But we are coming into an age of more dependence on technology. And we have a lot of talents in the Philippines. And the effort now being done, not just by government, but also by the private sector, is really how to come together and make sure that, you know, we will be able to retain the talents in the Philippines, because there's a lot of diaspora as far as that is concerned. Number two, make sure how do we fix our policies to make sure that we invite a lot more industries to invest in the Philippines, given the talents that we have? And number three, how do we prepare? How do we prepare the Philippines for a more AI-dependent world? There's a lot of retraining and, you know, a lot of enhancement of talents and skills that are already there. So it's a matter of concern. But the good thing about it is that both the government and the private sector are looking at it in a very serious way.
Madam Vice President, unfortunately, we're beginning to come to the end of our time together, and with the audience that's collected to listen to you this evening. But one of the takeaways I have from our conversation is your incredible confidence and optimism, not only in the future of the Philippines, the future of women, but you have a very sunny outlook. And yet, we're going through a time of great global challenge. And nowhere is it sharper than in the Asia Pacific. North Korea, contests with China, South China Sea, the possibility of the wheels coming off the global vehicle. So put those thoughts in your mind, and how do you look at the future, and how do all of us, how should we face both the challenges and the prospects of the Asia Pacific in the years ahead?
I think, Ambassador, it is one of the things that it was one of the benefits of being in a very challenging environment. Because I'm going back again to the 6 years that I was Vice President. I was telling you a while ago that it was a very tumultuous time for me. But if at all, it has trained me to look for the light in a very dark situation. When I was vice president, it felt like many of the channels that would have helped us in the work that we were expected to do were blocked off from us. There was our budget. There were opportunities to to interact with a lot of agencies. But what we learned was that you find your light. And you try to focus on what you can do and not what you can't. So whatever, I work with a very young staff. I think the average age in the office of the vice president when I was vice president was just 27. So it was a very young staff. I always joke that I'm the only old person in the office. But I always tell them that let's not focus on what's not there, because young people are very idealistic, and I always get invited and then disinvited to events, and they cry about it. But I always tell them, don't waste time trying to be emotional about it. Whatever opportunity is there, let's grab it. If it's only a small space that's available to us, let's make sure we maximize that space. And I think we all benefited from that. We have been recognized many times over in the work that we did. In 4 of the 6 years that I was vice president, we were getting the highest audit ratings. As far as human resources is concerned, as far as managing the office is concerned, we're very competitive. We have been very competitive. We always wanted to be on top. And I think that was because, a lot of difficulties were being thrown our way. And I think that's where the sunny disposition comes from. That despite the darkness, there's always light at the end of the tunnel, but we can't just we can just wait for that light to come. We have to find that light.
To make the light yourself.
Yes.
Well, as I listen to you tonight on so many different subjects, it's a real joy to hear you and to hear your optimism and hear your sense of the Philippines and its future. I've spent much of my life admiring the Philippines. It was an honor to serve there, but I believe deeply that the best days in our relationship lie ahead of us. This is an extraordinary relationship born in accidents of history, but has endured. And you carry the word tonight. You give us all hope. And thank you so much for being part of this discussion.
Thank you. Thank you,
Ladies
Ambassador.
and gentlemen,
Thank you for having me.
The Vice President. Madam.